Hello, everyone. Welcome back. First, assignment number 5, your next sprint. As we talked in the previous lecture, the goal is I am going to explain today your next sprint, the specification, and you're going to have 1 week to work. So your next assignment is due in a week. So hopefully you can work with your same team. That could be this expectation. If by any reason you are going to change your team or modify, up to you, just keep the same numbers. So 1 week, next assignment is all about continue working with the same thing that you worked before, Spring 1 and Spring 2. I am going to explain the details, but for your submission, the same elements. You are going to submit a backlog. I want to know, what do you consider stories this time? Because most of the things that I am going to describe are not new things to do, but modifications. Hopefully you remember your backlogs, knowledge acquisition, fixing bugs, stories, technical elements. So I am curious about what are you going to add there. Obviously, there is plenty of time for you to ask questions. Any question that you could have about whether or not something is a story, whether or not something should be there, please ask before the due date. It is better to ask than send appeals later, right? So the sprint backlog, the burden chart, I want to know how do you move forward with this during the week, the retrospective, the review by the end of your sprint, and the products. Again, the source code. The source code should compile and run as usual. That is mandatory, even though it uses one element that we're going to review. And this time, I am asking for a class diagram that is correct. Usually, for the previous assignment, we ask for the class diagram. I provide feedback. The points that we take off because errors in the design, because errors in the class diagrams, use a few points. Really, we didn't know your background, whether or not you were proficient with class diagrams or with design. However, that is something that we are reviewing this week, that we review in the previous lectures. Previous week, we talked in detail about the relationship between classes. I am going to review with you some examples of common errors. So for this sprint, the value of your class diagram and the value of this connection between the design and implementation is going to be important. So take care of your class diagram, take care of your design. We are going to review that you apply the things that we have been talking about. The goal for your design, the reason because we're talking about this, starting with a picture of your project, with this blueprint of the project. 2 things. The most important, help you with split tasks, help you with split the work between the team members. Think about the people that is working in the buildings around the campus. The blueprint is the thing that helps us to communicate between the different things and point out in the blueprint what I am doing, what you are doing, and how those things are going to be connected. The blueprint is not just the cover or the picture of the building. It's really the tool that helps us to split work and to know that the final result is going to be correct. It's going to fulfill some quality attributes. And with the software is something similar. Your expertise with design can be different from one another. However, it is important for you to know that one way to apply agility in software developing is taking care of the design. You can always go sit down in the computer and start programming and do something wrong, try again, try again, try again. And you can be doing that and call that sprints. And you can be working in the same project for weeks, months, years, but really you're not moving forward. You're just creating different versions, prototypes of the same software, of a solution for the same problem. Hopefully that is not the case with the assignment. Again, the idea is you have a good design, you move forward, and in some point you complete the design that is the solution that shows your knowledge about the technology that you're applying to solve the problem. Anyway, take care of the design, source code as usual, and the same things that you have submitted before. As you did before, only one person in your team submit. That's it. Just be sure that you put the names of everyone. So when you submit, the graders are going to put the same grade to all the people that is mentioned in the submission. We do not accept new names after that. So please do not forget to add everyone's name if that persons are working. So be careful with that. It's your responsibility as a team to be sure that whatever you're submitting is correct and is the thing that we're going to be grading. Assignment. For the Spring 3, very simple. You have this project working, you submit something like this in Spring 2, maybe you need to fix something. So if you didn't finish the project, if you didn't complete the project, probably the requirement number 1 is you need to finish. You need to have everything working according with the specification for the previous sprints. So if you didn't have it, you have a week to work. But other than that, the following. Number 1, specification 1, mandatory. I need a J menu. Some of you, for some reasons, have been using J bottoms. I don't know exactly why, but some people use that. Mandatory for the Spring 3 as a requirement, non-functional requirement, a constraint. I am asking you to use a menu bar. I want a J menu. So not that, a menu. Now, the options in the menu, load, save, new space, compile. You can add menu items or different options in the menu. You can have these 2 groups with the 4 elements. On the 4 elements, everyone like a menu, like in the bar in the picture, or use one group with 4 options. The distribution of the options, up to you, but I am asking for a menu bar. And obviously menu items, menus. So that is number 1. Probably something that you already have, good. If not, that is the first thing that I am asking you to fix in your current solution. Number 2. The icons in the panel. I am asking you to modify the icons that we have before and have something like the ones in the picture. To be more specific, number 1, instead of boxes, rectangles, I am asking you to draw ovals. It can be a perfect circle or something like an oval, a little bit longer, or whatever. But instead of rectangles, ovals. Second, I am removing the dots that we use for connection. As you can notice, the ovals, the only thing that they have inside is the name, this angular bracket, @ symbol, the bars, the minus, the parentheses. No more connection points or bars. It's just the circle with the name inside. So practically what I am asking you to do is to eliminate things. If we have the software and in the software before, we have these points for connections, well, now is delete go check the source code in which those points are dropped and remove them. Should not be so hard. Next, another thing that I am asking you to do is regarding the icons with parentheses, they are not going to be in the left panel. As you can notice here, the parentheses are not longer in the panel. Instead of that, in every single tab, in every single working space that you create, always, 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 you are going to include, use by default, like that. One open and one closing. I put them in the corners. I am not asking for a particular position. Use those two icons should be already there. One open, one close, by default in any new space. So if I click here, or if I create new tabs, always the working spaces are going to have this open parentheses, closing parentheses, only one of those. Because they are going to be there, I do not need to move them to do the drag and drop from the left panel. If we think about the programming, it's like, well, if we already have this working, and basically what we are doing probably is that every time that I take something and drag that something to the working space, that means to add the element, the icon, the operator, or whatever you have to a data structure, when you do the drag and drop, what I am asking you to do now is, well, use by default the working spaces in the constructor. You are going to add these two elements to the data structure, so they are always going to be dropped. They are always going to be there. They are going to be always there, and there is no way to add more just because they do not exist as a new choice. That is basically the requirement, a modification of the constructor. Yes, I have a question in the chat. Should I be able to move these icons? You know, drag and drop inside of the working space? My answer is yes. They should have exactly the same behavior that they have currently, exactly the same behavior that any other of the icons. So my goal is they are not going to change behavior. They are not going to be different from what they was before. The only thing is now I cannot add more because they are not available at the input. And now, by default, they are on the screen. By default, they are on the data structure. They are there, but yes, I can move them just like before when I drag them there. So moving, yes. So the menu bar, remove the parentheses from the left panel. Instead of the boxes, now circles. Remove the points for connections, the dots and the bars. And now in the working spaces, always having the parentheses, one open, one close. That is a group of requirements. Other than that, next. As you can imagine, and just to be sure about the definition, now I do not have points for connection. I do not have this input or output. However, something that I want to have is these icons should behave in the same way that they are behaving right now with those points for connection. However, the connection itself is not going to be a dot inside of the oval, but the full oval is able to receive connections. So, for instance, if I have the circle and I am drawing an arrow from some other element, if I start here and I drag a line and I drop here, just because I drop the line there, that is going to be an input line. So still, I am going to be able to connect things for input, but now instead of connecting to a particular place like before, the input is going to be every line that I drop in that circle. Dropping the place in which I finish the line, that place, that line is an input. Regarding, I have a question in the chat, so I'm going to go back. The first point, you mean about this one? The first point, talking about the menu bar? Yes, okay. So question, I am going to ask for your help. I am asking you to have a menu bar in the graphical user interface. That is something that I want to have. Can you help me with what are you going to put in the backlog? Question number one, is it going to be a story, yes or no? If yes, what could be the story? Tricky question, two things. Do we need a story? Because if we are going to have a task, every single task is always inside of a story, right? The tasks are like the instructions of the methods. You cannot have an instruction if you do not have a method in which you put the instruction. So if you're thinking about the task, well, you need a story for that task. What is going to be the story that is going to have those tasks? Okay, that is a good point. Now you have clear that one thing is the template for stories. As a user, I want to. You can use the template for everything. However, not everything is a story. Here, I want a menu. If I am telling you that I want a menu, that is a story or not? That is technical or not? I want a menu, is what I am asking you to do. Exactly. That is a very good difference. Hopefully you are reading the chat. There are two different things. I want a menu. I want a J menu bar. You need to remember that this versus this, two different things. Two different things because one is technical and probably you can think about it like different task, the bar, the menu item, and different elements in the bar versus use what the customer wants. Answering the question before, do you think that if I talk about this, not the J menu, if I am talking about, I want a menu in terms of, you know, the menu in any application. I am not talking about a particular implementation when I talk about the menu. Before I did it, but can we create a story in which we talk about this customer want a menu? Can we use that? I want a menu as a story for our backlog? Yes or no? It is not technical, right? I mean, technical, the name of the class in the API, but a menu is just a panel. It's a requirement, it's something that the customer wants. And I will agree with the chat. We can. You can have a story about your customer want to have a menu in order to, you create a story. It's not technical, the menu. And thank you, yes. Following the idea, I can have a story with the menu. And the next thing that we need to ask is, well, that story I want as a user, I want a menu, etc. Follow the invest principles. And I think you helped me with one of the most important, is valuable. And I think we can agree like, well, the customer want that. And maybe before we provide these bottoms or other different options, but the customer insists in having a menu. So we can argue about the value and independent, negotiable, and so on. Hopefully we're going to agree that, yeah, that can be a story. That can be a requirement. It's a requirement for the graphical user interface. I think the question that you're asking in the chat, I think it is okay that you put some kind of, depending on the format that you are following to submit your stories, you can add a column. In that column, you can put the classification that you are using. Remember, there are 4 different elements that you can put in your backlog. So you can put that there in a column or a parenthesis before or after your story. I don't know, you can provide a note with whatever extra information that you want to share with the graders. So that is a good idea. Yeah, so you can put a note, and I'm not asking you for any particular format for this, but use a note, a message there, a column, like a comment, anything. You do not need that, because in this particular case, if you put a story, if you put in your product backlog as a user, I want a menu, that look like you understand the requirement. What you cannot do, and you need to be careful with this, a common error, and it doesn't matter the comment, you cannot use as a user, I want a JMenu or a JMenu bar or whatever technical name of the classes that you want to use or something like that. The technicalities is not something that you put in the stories, because remember, the goal for your stories is they can be easy to understand for the stakeholders, and not all the stakeholders are developers. So if you put a menu with or without the note for the grader, that look good. If you put JMenu, JMenu bar, or any other name for a class in the library, that is going to be an issue. Similar rule for panel, JPanel, and so on. The stories are not technical. Do not use technical names. This one versus this one. So that is the point. Yes, that is a very good point. Kamal, you make the point. Just think about your software. The menu is part of the graphical user interface, and someone is going to develop the graphical user interface, but different stories is all about the functionality. Someone is going to develop the functionality. I have a requirement to have a graphical user interface with several different elements. I am not going to go into the details, but on the other hand, you have all the stories related with your model. In the case of our project, all these stories related with load, save, compile, and so on. So different things. Yeah. Okay, so that answered the question. Your icons. The only thing that I asked you is to delete the points of connection. The only thing that I asked you is to delete the point here and the 2 points here. However, I still want this guy to be able to receive 1 connection for input and 2 connections for output. But now I do not have a point in which I am going to do the connection. What I am going to do is use connect the line, and if I release inside of this, the connection is an input. If I start the connection here and release in a different place, the connection is an output. I want to have only one input, and I want to have two outputs. The user should not be able to connect more inputs or to create more outputs. What does it mean? I am going to talk as a technician, not only as a customer, but that means that somehow you have maybe counters of how many inputs or how many outputs you have in a particular node. And once you reach the limit, the one input in this case, or the two outputs in this case, you do not allow more connections. The node is not longer working as accepting inputs or allowing to create outputs. There is no way right now to delete connections. I am not asking you for that yet. So far, once you connect inputs and outputs, that node is done. Nothing else to be done there. Well, who is asking for the changes? Your customer. How do you identify your customer in the stories? As a user, that is fine. So far, the important thing is identify the actors. And so far, your system have only two actors, something that the system do, sometimes something that the customer, the user do. We do not have a specific classification for the user. We do not have like administrator and normal users or other things. So it's only one user. And so far, the system, you have these things that happen, like compilation, that is done by a particular module inside of the software. So the user, the system, so far. So for the changes, the user. The connections start when you click in an oval. So clicking in any oval, like this one, is going to start a connection, if that oval still can have outputs. And when you release in another oval, this one is going to count as an output. This one is going to count as an input. My constraint is in a node like this, in which you already have the two connections to something else. Even though you click here, and even though you try to do a line, it should not be allowed. Should not be allowed. What is going to happen? Your program is not going to draw the line. Your program is going to show some kind of error message. What are you going to do to interact with the user and tell the user that that is not allowed? It is up to you. My only request is do something. I mean, remember, you need to tell the user that something is happening, because if not, the user is going to think that the software is not working. So a message, or not drawing the line. If you are drawing the lines real time, just take a decision with your team and implement something there. Well, that is up to you. I am describing here this click, drag, release. I understand that some of you did this click here and then click in another one. So some of you implement click, click. Others implement this click, drag, release. Both options are okay. My only request, the change is now you do not have these points that you have before, the points for the connection. Now I can make the click, the first one, the second one, in any place on the node. So I can click here and then click here and I have the line. Or I can click, drag, release, and I have the line. Both options are correct. Both options are possible. If you can show a message in some place of your system, just to let the graders know how your system behaves, so the graders do not think that your program is not working. Just show a message or some kind of dialog box at the beginning with the instructions. That is fine. But again, the only requirement, the new thing in the software is we do not have the points of connection that we had before. However, the nodes should still accept this one input, two outputs, the other one, two input, one output, the other one and one, connected with everyone, whatever. So another one and one that mandatory. This one can be connected with whatever, but then it should close a loop. So two that are whatever, and the other two that mandatory should create somehow a loop. Doesn't matter how many elements are here in the middle. The bar, there is no limit for how many inputs, but only one output, or the opposite, only one input, and it doesn't matter how many outputs, and one, just like the instruction before. So those behaviors are the same ones that you already have. The only thing that I am deleting is the points of connections. Now, the full circle is a point for connection, and the rules are enforced just like before, but without having this graphical representation of where to connect. Well, if you think about it, for instance, if you use any tool for doing UML class diagrams, you do not have points for connection in the class, right? I have the class, and if I am creating a UML diagram, really, I can create inheritance or whatever, and there is not a limitation of how many things I can connect as an input or as an output. Moreover, there is no one particular point of connection. So I am moving forward in that direction, and that is the reason because, well, now I have these ovals, and I have these arrows, but I am enforcing these inputs and outputs in a different way, without having the graphical representation, without having this limitation of inputs in the left, outputs to the right. Now it's just whatever. Like inheritance can be here, usually down, but also can be in the top. It's just any point is good to connect. So if you have used Asta, for instance, to create the UML, if you have two classes and you select that you want to implement inheritance, usually what happens is, well, clicking one, clicking the other, and you're creating the connection. And well, depending which one you select first and last, that is going to be the direction of your inheritance, right? Who is going to be the father and who is going to be the child. So I am asking you for something similar for this new version. So same behavior without the points of connection. And most of you, for the sprint number 2, what you have is a component here, usually a panel, another panel here, usually with the name, and another panel here, another panel here, and another panel here. Most of you, what you have right now is for every single icon, you have a collection of several panels or components or labels or whatever. some of the graphical elements. So that is a composition of several different things. And some of you are using the listeners here, and the listeners here, and the listeners here, and here. And with that, you are achieving the connections. That is fine. What I am asking you to do now is, well, probably you want to keep the panel here. Up to you. If you still want to continue using another panel for the name, that is fine. But I am removing, or asking you to remove, this panel, and this panel. So now you cannot have this listener that is particular to the point of connection, but now the listener is going to be for the full thing. Now, for the full thing, and you need to identify if I want to move, if I want to connect an input, or if I want to connect an output. That was the reason, because before I mentioned the release or the drag, like different events in the mouse, 3 different things that I want to do with one element. That is the challenge, really. Again, you have nodes that you drag before. Always, always, always. The first icon that I click, for instance, if I click here, this one, click here, or use click and drag. I am going to release this in another place like this. So clicking one, move, releasing the other, or click here and then click here. Always, 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 you're going to choose one and then you're going to choose another one, right? So always is going to be the first one and the second one. Always, always, always. The first one is going to be the one that provides the output. The first one is going to be the one that I am choosing to be the output. The second one is the one that I am choosing to be the connection as an input. So the direction of the line that you are drawing is always from the output, the node that is considering the output, to the node that is going to receive the input. If I want to connect an input to this one, I need to click first in whatever is the icon that is going to provide the output, this one maybe, and then the second time, the second click should happen here. So when I click here first, that is for an output. When I click here, the last, that is for an input. That is kind of the rule. One click, another click. And the only way to create lines is to connecting nodes. I cannot create lines from the emptiness, from the working space to a node. I cannot have something like this. There are no lines without another node as the origin. So always one node is the origin and another node is the destiny for the line. That's it. Hopefully that clarifies. Okay. So click, click, one connection. That's it. Same nodes, same goals. I didn't mention that one here, but again, talking about these guys, this one can be used only for outputs. You can only click here to start a new line, and only one. And this one can be used only for release the line. So you cannot click here and start a new line. That should not work. This one receive an input, and this one provide an output. So click here, and I can create a line to connect with some place. But this one, I cannot click here and start the line. That should not work. I can start the line in some other node, and at the end, complete the line here, and the connection is going to be in that direction. Again, the behavior is the same that you already have, but now you do not have these points for connections. Now the full element is the place in which you can release the line or start the line and applying the rules. Very good question. Something that I do with the nodes for this one in particular. Before we have this one, and we have this one with two options. The option with a square here and a bar here, and the opposite. What I am doing now is to split this, the one with the bar, in these two. And I am defining, you know what? I have from one of that, I use for the name, I use these two symbols, just to try to give an idea of what is going to happen. One of these have n inputs, so n connections entering, and only one output, one connection going out. And the other one have only one connection possible to go in, and whatever number could go out. So I split that one, the bars, into nodes to move forward in this direction. So inputs, outputs, two different nodes, two different outputs with those rules. So this one, my mistake, should be like this, and I am missing the other one. Thank you. Good. So the menu, the change in the panel, I am going to fix these ones. The change in the rules, now without the dots. So basically eliminate things. It's more about, well, there are things that are going to change, eliminate, and things that are going to be added, new ideas about the graphical representation, changes. The connections, the same example that I shared with you before. The only thing that I want to do is to show you how they are going to look now. One example, I can just connect a line from the open parentheses to the closing parentheses. That will be okay. Obviously, doing this, do not allow any more icons to be added. The icon, the same. I described this just before. The description, if you want me to be more specific, this one, you can have only one input, one output. You like before, the input can come from anywhere and the output can go anywhere. Two, one input, one output, and one loop. One loop means I have an output here that could go anywhere, anywhere. In some point, this one, this output, should connect as an input in the same node. That is, my friend, the add node. So that is the only one special with this requirement. One of the output should connect as an input, so one loop, but I have an extra input that I don't care where that comes from, and I have an extra output, I do not care where that goes. In your algorithm, from the one that check the compilation thing, what I am asking you is for this node to verify that in some point there is a loop there. That is the only special guy. Everyone else is just connected with whatever. Good. So the add. This should be correct, just like before. Only now different shapes and no dots for the connections. This is an example for the add. You can notice here this loop and the other input and output to whatever place we can connect. The example with these guys, as we have it before, two inputs, one output, one input, two output. I just use different colors for the lines. The goal for me is just to share with you the idea. You do not need to use these different colors. The only thing that you need to do is to draw the lines like you did before. The colors used for me trying to explain things to you, hopefully facilitate following which are input, which are outputs, and what is happening. That's it. These ones, please. So it's going to be easy to know when you check in a node what lines are for the input, what lines are for the output. Yeah, please. This other example, as you notice, these are the examples for the new bars. The one with one input, several outputs, and the opposite, several input with the output. Just to clarify with the previous question here, what I am asking you to do is to have some kind of arrowhead to identify which is the initial point of the line and which one is the end point. So obviously the easy way to do that visually is with this arrow. However, if it's something that helps you, you can just put a dot. Maybe it's easy to draw a dot that drawing the triangle, or you can draw a triangle like this if you want, or you can draw a square if you want. I am not really concerned about which symbol you use there. My only requirement is to identify the initial point for the line and the end point of the line. So just draw an arrowhead in the end point, whatever arrowhead you want to use, whatever shape you want to use for the arrowhead. Probably, usually the people go for this one. The easy thing to do is to draw a circle, but up to you. Obviously, this one look better. Whatever you want to use, just put an arrowhead at the end. My request for the inputs and outputs is you can do it in real time, except for the loop. The loop, obviously, you do not know if there is a loop, probably until compilation time, but you can do it in real time, at least for the number. The number, I am talking about the number of inputs and the number of outputs that you allow to have. For the loop, the only thing that you can check is 2 inputs, 2 outputs. That is a counter that you can have in real time. However, it's going to be until compilation time that you can check for the loop, right? Because it's something that you need to do checking several nodes. I am not asking for any requirement regarding how many listeners to use. What I mentioned before about one listener that affect the full panel, just an idea, but the implementation, the details of the programming, up to you. Is your choice if you want to use action listeners or mouse listeners. I have reviewed both in your Spring 2. Some of you are working with mouse listeners, some people is working with action listener. Again, usually depending on if you are using JPanels or widgets, still for the Spring 3 is up to you. The loop only for the add symbol and only for one output, one input, one loop. So going back here, only for this, there should be one loop between the output and the input in that particular node, but there is another input and another output that we don't care. Good. Okay, so the loop, this guy with the multiple input outputs, the new node, the other new node, and basically those are the examples that can show you what to do new. That's it. That is your Sprint 3. Again, this should work. Why? Because there is no reason to review your activities or your design if the final product didn't work. So we're expecting that the product work. Mostly of the things that I am asking you to do is modification, change, delete things, and obviously a few things that you need to add. Probably here with a new way to implement the listeners, open to you what you're going to do. Important thing, when you finish, during your work, during your planning, and that is something that we're going to talk later, you are going to be creating, working with a design, working with a class diagram. This time, I am asking you, we are going to review that your class diagram really show what your system is. And therefore, I would like to review with you some examples of common errors with class diagrams. Well, you do not need the minus. This one is just a node that have one input, one output. So it's really just something that I put inside. Similar here. You can have these two connected directly, or you can have these two connected with one of these and then close. Or in this example, I just put these two, or you can have these guys here inside of the loop. I can do something like the parentheses here, and that parenthesis connected with one of these add, connected with the closing parentheses, and then I can connect this guy here with something that could be this, and connecting this with the minus, another minus, closing this, and then close the loop like that. I mean, it's just playing with the icons. I use in the example the minus. I could put the minus and the brackets, or if you do not like the minus, it could be used directly connected those two, I mean, the two outputs to the two inputs and done. Those connections follow the rules, they are correct. And yeah, I mean, I can have just here, like one with the minus that have one input, one output, or I can have 1, 2, 3, and this can be minus. All of them have one input, one output. That also works. Make sense? And that one still works. Something that you have from previous version is somehow some of you implemented double click or any other action, but the idea is clicking here, open a dialog box, and in the dialog box, I am able to put a value. That still is going to work, yeah. I mean, anything that I am not mentioning here to eliminate or something is still a requirement, is still something that should be there, or I am assuming that it's going to be there because I am not asking for elimination of that. So yeah, should be there. Good. Okay, quickly, just to give you an idea. Class diagram is going to be important. I need to check that you understand the relationships. If you're familiar with patterns, great, you can use them. There is plenty of opportunities for that here. However, we haven't reviewed that in the class. I cannot force you or ask you or evaluate you to do that. But something that we reviewed the previous week, something that I check with you is the representation of the classes, what should be in your class diagram in terms of your classes, and most important, the relationship and the connection between the relationship in the picture and the source code. How everything that you show in a class diagram is a representation of something that exists in the source code. If I go and review your source code, it should be the same that go and review your diagram. Usually, it's easy to review the blueprint, it's easy to review the diagram, but it's useless if that diagram, if that blueprint do not really correspond to the source code that I have, if the blueprint do not correspond to the building, right? So my expectation is that you are going to review and have a diagram that hopefully you're going to use to organize your work But worst case scenario, you're going to check at the end that your diagram and your code really match. And quick examples of things that I am expecting you to do. Keep it simple. Separation of concerns, coupling or decoupling. Those things, we review them with the source code. If you apply them in the source code, they also exist with a good diagram. A good diagram, a clean design is something that is going to have a clean coding. If one is easy to read, probably the other is also easy to read. And readability is a key idea for keeping the project agile, for being able to make changes. With that in mind, what do you think about this class diagram? Is something that looks like a blueprint? Is something that you are using to drive your management decision? Is something that you're using to communicate with other members of your team about how to move forward with the project? Is, for instance, something that I can give you and give you the source code of a previous version of the software from previous semesters and ask you to do extensibility, extend somehow the project or modify somehow the project? And maybe my answer could be no. I don't know if you agree with that. There are some issues here. Some issues, and one of them is, as you mentioned in the chat, I agree with that, the arrangement, right? I think we can organize things a little bit better here. Now, we can do a better organization, yes, but there are other things here that probably are not helping with the project, that probably something is not good with this diagram beyond the arrangement. And now you're pointing things. Guys, usually this is not mandatory, but just imagine that you have this diagram and you have the source code also. And this is legacy code. This is some project that you need to fix. Hopefully you agree with me that you're going to start with the diagram, again, assuming that the diagram represents the project. And probably my recommendation is you are going to start with the class that have the main. You have two options, top down, bottom up. Top down, in terms of this, start with the main, check what the main is using, and from that, go down to the details. Obviously, you can start with the details and in some point check how those details are connected with the main. My approach here with something that is kind of complex, it's like, well, let's find the main, let's find the top. And this is my top in the diagram. I have this class and something that I identify there is the main method. You know, static, because the underline, public, and so on. The particular software here is using these icons for the variables and the method instead of the plus and the minus, whatever. That is the main. Things that you will notice here that are going to put red lights in terms of the quality of the diagram, in terms of this being clean. Number one, reflection. You know what to expect in the project. Is the diagram for one of the projects that you are doing. The first question that you will ask is, do I need reflection? Do I need a variable from the same class in the class that have my main? I am talking about a global variable. Or I am going to be creating this variable to call a method that basically what the reflection is telling here. I am going to create an object and then call a method from the local class. Starting with the fact that that is not possible. That is not possible because the only thing that I have here is the main and the constructor. And if I have the main and the constructor, I am going to create an object from the class in the main, obviously, and that is going to call the constructor. But I am calling the constructor for doing new, and that do not need the line. The line, probably because you are using a variable that is global and the type of the variable is mainframe. You do not need a global variable because the only thing that we are calling is the constructor, and the only thing that you have is the main method. You can eliminate the global variable and just keep the variable local. Whatever is the reason, I mentioned two options. Whatever is the reason is something that you can clean, is something that you can change. You can eliminate that loop. That loop is not needed. And therefore, when you delete this, it's not only about delete that line in the diagram. It's about going to the source code and remove the source code that is equivalent to that line. That is the point. Clean design, clean code. Okay, I have a question in the chat. Not sure about the question. Can you clarify the question? I am going to go back a little bit. I have these icons should be in that manner. Okay, so someone is helping. Thank you. So I have these icons in the left panel. I am not sure if we are talking about how many of these I can have here. Like if I can have several, for instance, this one, the answer to that should be yes. So I can drag 1, 2, 3. That could be possible. The same for the loops, 1, 2, 3 or more. That could be possible. So any number of elements from any of these ones. The only one that I move to only one is the parentheses, and those are not longer in the left panel. Those should be automatically added to the working area. But for everything else, you can have as many as you want. Okay. So going back to the class. This is an issue. Another issue that you notice, and you put that before in the chat, the diamonds, aggregation, composition. According with this, there are nothing, which is a question mark. I cannot say that is wrong or is correct. It's just a question mark, something that is going to make me go to the source code and review. If really you do not have in the class that have the main something related with, you know what, the left panel, the working areas, or something else. And there are a lot of things going on with your program. Now you know you have to submit 2 versions. So it's a question mark. Another thing that called my attention and something that you need to check in your different versions is, did you notice this arrow here that is pointing into the main? What does that mean? Having an arrow that is pointing to the class that have the main. That is correct. By any chance, that is a hint for you that something could be wrong? The class that have the main, and you have an arrow pointing in. What could be the problem? None? What is the meaning of the arrow that is pointing to the class? Do you remember? We reviewed that in a previous lecture. What is the meaning of this class B arrow connected with the main? Okay, good. The menu is using the main. Yeah, using, in my example, be connected with main. This arrow is using. What is the meaning of using? Do we remember that we are talking about using mean calling a method? Yeah, good. So what do you think? According with the diagram, I have two methods here. I have a constructor main and I have the main method. Makes sense that there is a method in another class, whatever is the name, calling a method in the mainframe. And you have all the methods for the mainframe. Yes, that is correct. There is any chance or there is any reason for something to be called there? I don't know. Question. What can I be calling? In particular from a class menu. And that class menu basically have also a constructor and a listener. Anything? Help me with the programming. Let's assume for a moment that really you need to use some method in the main. Did you notice that there is this line going from one class to the other, pointing in that direction, and then you have the arrow pointing in the opposite direction? That is a loop. I am not telling you that there is an error. I am telling you that every single time that you look to a diagram and you look something like this, there is a question mark here. There is a question mark because two things. Number one, if I have a loop that is a reflection or a loop between two classes, always the question is going to be, do we really need to do this? This is necessary. Think about two classes like two different cities. More connections you have, loops or loops here, what is happening with the coupling or with the coupling? Is increasing or decreasing? You have two independent entities or you have two connected entities. Something that you need to be careful with. Loops are a problem. If you can avoid loops, that is a good idea. Number two, several connections, two classes that are strongly connected, more than one connection, always ask yourselves why, for what. And if you have a good answer, like if you know the patterns, decorator, composite, you will remember two connections, inheritance and aggregation. You have a good answer for what? Yeah, it's a pattern and we're doing blah, blah, blah. Okay, good. But if you cannot provide a good answer, if that double connection just happened to happen, probably it's an area of opportunity for refactoring, for improving. Classes that have too many connections going in or too many connections going out are going to be a problem. And that is something that we're going to review in detail in the next lecture. But every single class, just consider the class a node. Too many inputs or too many outputs, they are two different problems. It's something that you do not want. Too many connections, like all of these, or all these crazy lines here, or these lines here, or these lines here. probably arrangement. But the first thing that you need to review here, to ask yourselves is, do I really need all these connections? There is a different way to make this work. One case, one thing that maybe you can think about it. Just imagine that I have these 3 classes in red. I am going to use rectangles. And just imagine that I have these 3 classes in blue. And for some reason, I need to connect them. I don't know, maybe this one is going to be connected with that one, or this one with that one. Whatever. Classes in red need to be connected with the classes in blue. A lot of connections. That is what happened in the source code. That is what happened in your diagram. Tell me, what could be a solution, an improvement for this scenario? What you should do when you have 2 groups of classes that need to connect with the others? Did you know a solution for improving this kind of a scenario? 2 groups of classes that need to connect each others. Yeah. For those of you that know about the pattern, this is asking for a bridge, right? This is exactly the idea of the bridge pattern, the connection of 2 groups of classes. Avoid this crazy number of lines. Do you remember what is the solution with the bridge pattern? Which are the steps that I need to follow in order to implement the bridge with these 2 groups of classes? Solution number 1, yeah, step number 1. The most powerful element that you have in object-oriented programming is inheritance, and obviously polymorphic behavior. When you have these 2 groups of classes, the bridge pattern, the common sense in the programming environment is, well, you know what? When you have 2 groups, it's a good idea to have a common parent for those groups. And I do not need to tell you that that common parent should be an interface. Two group of classes, the red ones and the blue ones, 2 parents. And if I want to do these connections, the only thing that you need to do, and that is step 2 with the bridge pattern, right, is to connect the parents. Now, here, the particular recommendation is a particular kind of connection. If you're following the pattern, then this connection, the one in green, should be a particular one. Aggregation instead of association, because particular features that we want to achieve, maybe a delegation. But even if you do not fully follow the pattern, even if the only thing that you want to do is to connect these 2 groups with association, like I did before in my example, you can define that association between the parents. It's not 100% the pattern. This is not about the pattern. This is just about, well, connecting the parents represent that we can connect any of the childs in red with any of the childs in the blue family. The representation in the diagram is going to be something like this. It's a new idea. It's not like one of the childs here connected with several here. It's just about, I can connect one of these with maybe several of these or several in both parts, whatever you want to do. The diagram look clean. Also, your source code is going to be clean. Moreover, your source code is going to be following good practices. The clean diagram is useful also to have a better source code. And that is something that I want to ask you to take care with your project. Anyway, I am going to stop here. We continue next lecture. Any question? Okay, guys, see you next lecture. Thank you.